Okay. I clicked it on mine. I don't know what it's doing.
Does it say, welcome to the Blue Dog Whisperer, my first episode with a congressional candidate in over a year, and I'm so honored to have Democrat Brian Varela, who is running for New Jersey's 7th congressional district. This is by far the most competitive district in the Garden State and also one of the most competitive congressional districts in the country.
Yeah, the path to the Democrats taking over the House comes right through NJ7.
It sure does. And, a lot of people don't realize that New Jersey, it's been dismissed as a blue state, but we were very close to electing President Trump in 2024. And were you surprised by not just Kamala Harris's defeat, but also by how close New Jersey was? And explain your reasoning.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I'm born and raised here in New Jersey, and my entire life, New Jersey's gone blue, and it went blue in the presidential as well. But I never could have imagined that it would have been that Trump would have performed as well as he did in New Jersey. Like if you had told me a month before the election that Donald Trump was going to win Passaic County, I'd say you're out of your mind. And he did. So yes, it was shocking to me.
Well, a lot of people may be listening from outside of New Jersey. For those who don't know, Passaic County is a diverse county. There are some very urban areas like Patterson and some more diverse areas like Clifton, Passaic. But there are also some very rural areas of Passaic County as well. Now, Passaic County is not in your district, but your district voted very narrowly for President Trump. So if you are to become the next representative for our district, you are probably going to have to win over some of those Trump voters. How do you plan on doing it with your politics? And explain to our listeners how you would describe your politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as a party, we've really struggled on messaging. Like when Kamala Harris was talking about the economy last cycle, and when she said that the economy was doing great, she wasn't wrong, right? The problem is that she was looking at some of the key economic indicators that all signaled to a good economy. The problem is that working class voters don't have IRAs or an asset portfolio with millions of dollars, right, where they can see the value of that rising, right? The what they see rising in prices are the cost of eggs, right, rents, and things that they're buying on a daily basis. So I think that as a party, being so disconnected from working class voters to not being capable of taking that into consideration, I think it cost us. And I think that when it comes to this district, when someone shares a lot of the same lived experiences as the voters of this district, it's a lot easier to relate to the daily struggles and the day to day of the lives of a lot of the voters here. So I think that yes, she wasn't wrong, but it was a huge. We absolutely missed the ball on that one, right? Because the fact is that folks were hearing what Donald Trump was saying. And when they hear someone talking about how great the economy is and they can't relate to that, but they hear about someone talking about the cost of eggs, and that makes a little bit more sense, all of a sudden Donald Trump becomes a bit more appealing to those voters.
I remember the 2012 election, re-election of President Barack Obama. And what I remember, and I was only 15 at the time, but from what I remember, President Obama, his messaging was different because although Joe Biden wasn't running for reelection, Vice President Harris was part of the administration. So she should have acted as if she were the president in some capacity. And what President Obama did that I think worked to his advantage was he said, okay, listen, things are improving, but they're not perfect for a lot of people. We still have a lot of work to do. This is where we started. This was where we're continuing. This is where we're going to end. I don't remember Vice President Harris ever doing that. I remember it was almost like a self-congratulatory back patting party, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, they played it safe. I'm 36 years old, right? I, to me, it was absolutely crazy that they wouldn't get on a podcast, right? That they wouldn't interview with influencers. Uh, as a 36-year-old, I'm not the youngest spring chicken, but we don't have cable, right? We cut the cord a long time ago, which means that people more along my generation and maybe a little bit older, definitely younger, right? They're not getting their news from 60 Minutes, right? And that's important. You've got to do those interviews as well. But for this for the type of voter, especially in a presidential general, right, that you want to appeal to, like you've got to take some risks and you've got to get out there and you've got to get a little uncomfortable, and you can't worry about being safe, right? You've got to be very clear on your positions, and I think that if there's one thing that voters are repelled by is wishy-washiness, right? I think when someone is not truly authentic and they're guarded, I think people can recognize that and they don't like it. And so I think that for Donald Trump, he's changed the rules of this game, right? The way politics works now is not what it was 10 years ago. And part of the new culture that we're working in is people on both sides of the aisle are very much drawn to authentic candidates, even if they're flawed. They may not be perfect. They may not agree with you on every point, but at the very least, you know where they stand and you know that they're real.
I totally agree with what you're saying. So it sounds like, and I know you personally, that you know a lot about what's gone wrong as far as the Democrats and their messaging. How are you applying those lessons as well as your experiences in your politics to win in your districts?
I think it's going back to a lot of your lived experiences. Like I think when you can talk to a voter who's behind on their mortgage, who's behind on their credit card bills, maybe every month they play bill roulette, right? Where they might selectively choose to ignore a bill or two and leave it off for the following month. When you can relate to those experiences through firsthand lived experiences, I think it opens people up to your messaging from a different angle. Primarily because you know what they're going through and you know that what their struggles have been. And so I think that when it comes to any sort of a successful campaign, it's less. You, look, we're going to do the Trump bashing, right? We're going to do Republican bashing. I don't like it. I'm not a fan of it, but I understand that sadly that's part of the nature of this game, right? You have to be able to do that. But I think where we've been missing the boat is that we're not offering a new vision, right? Like, so if we're tearing something down, what are we going to replace it with, right? And I think that candidates have to get very good at that. And I think that when you can relate to voters and their lived experiences and what they go through on a daily basis, and you're offering new solutions, a new vision to help really elevate people's lives and really fix the country, I think that resonates. And I think that when you can keep the messaging. Look, there's a lot of social justice issues out there that we definitely have to worry about, but when it comes to voters specifically in this district, you've got to be able to tie it back to economics. You've got to tie it back to affordability, right? You've got to tie it back to populism, right? How are these things that we want? What's our vision, right? What we want to implement, right? How is this going to make lives better for everyone? And when you're talking about improving our economy, right? That means more money in people's wallets. That means going out to dinner an extra night a week. That maybe even means a vacation or two per year, right? And I think that's as a Democrat, like as a Democratic Party, if we want to start winning again, we got to go back to some of these kitchen table issues.
For sure. So, what are some of your stances on these issues? I think, and I hate to put labels on it, but there is a divide, unfortunately, within the Democratic Party. And you've got to appeal to all aspects of not just the Democrats, but also independents, maybe some disenfranchised Republicans. So, how would you describe your politics, and how do you think that your politics will resonate with the people of the 7th District?
I think that like most Democrats, right, we believe in equality for all. We believe in human rights. We believe in not having corruption, right? Um, and all of those things are important, but I think that you've got to be able to tie those things back to the economy, right? So let's talk about universal childcare, right? Which many people will say, oh, well, that's a social justice issue, right? Or some Republicans will call it a handout, right? But I think there's an entire economic case to be made about a universal childcare. Like if you think about it, let's call a spade, right? When you can't afford childcare, who stays at home? It's typically mom, right? It's just the nature of society. Um, there are mothers out there who can't pursue careers, they can't pursue educations because it doesn't make sense, right? If you're going to go work at Walmart for 17 bucks an hour, right? Um, and you're going to put your kid in childcare, right? What you're making at Walmart after taxes is barely covering childcare. So what's the point, right? But if we were to have something like universal in place, right, or I'm open to other versions of it, but if you were to empower families to be able to affordably put their kid into childcare where it makes financial sense, Now you're putting people in a position where they can go work, they can go be productive, right? That's level one. At a higher level, you're actually empowering people to seek careers, to seek an education. And when they do that, what ultimately ends up becoming is that they become a more productive member of society, right? So let's put it in short-term economics. When you've got a mom who's out there working, right, and they're generating extra disposable income, that family is not turning around and doing stock buyback programs, right? They're not turning around and pumping an executive compensation bonus package, right? They're turning around and they're going out to dinner an extra night a week. They are buying things around the house. So what you're saying, I'm not saying all of it's going to go in this direction, but you're going to have a considerable part of this extra income actually going back into the local economy. And that in of itself is going to stimulate the local economy within these communities, which means that everyone rises, right? You've got cash changing hands more often between consumers and businesses, et cetera, right? So you'll actually see a lift. Um, that's short term, right? If we want to talk about long term, what's MAGA, right? Make America Great Again. The time period that they're typically referencing are the 50s and the 60s. I don't think people realize what we did in the 50s and the 60s, right? Because if you compare the amount of money right now that we're putting into R&D, we're putting into infrastructure, right? We're investing into education. It is nothing compared to what we were investing in the 50s and 60s. And what we were doing back then is the more we invested into these different buckets, the more productive we actually became as a society, right? So what that ended up doing is that it actually widened the middle class, right? Because the more productive we became, the higher our economy rose, which means that the wider the middle class became, and people were able to do more with their income, right? So when I'm talking about doing something with universal childcare, for example, is that if you're allowing parents to now become more productive members of society, that in of itself is going to have an effect well down the road, where as an economy, we are going to advance, we're going to grow. And that's not even counting the fact that that is a direct investment in education, which means that a lot of those kids that are now getting childcare, right? They have professionals that are highly involved in their development, right? From technically infant, right? But 1 year old, 2 year olds, all the way to pre-K four. That child is now better prepared for kindergarten, right? They're now more advanced going into the what we would call the traditional school system. So we're talking about giving kids a head start, right? They're now starting a little bit ahead, and all of those things pays dividends. And then I think that studies have shown that for every dollar we invest in education, we get a positive ROI out of that. So short term, you're going to see the local economy better stimulated, right? Long term, you're creating a more productive society, which improves our economy, improves people's livelihoods, improves health, improves mental health. I mean, the case is there. It's not me guessing. Like, just go look at history, go look at the studies. It's all there.
I completely agree with you. And one of the things, I mean, my favorite president as a blue dog Democrat is President Clinton. And, part of what President Clinton did when he signed the welfare reform was he gave people a helping hand. He realized that in order to help people to help themselves, you've got to give a little to get a lot. And that's exactly what President Clinton did. And the Republicans, and I'll give them credit, they went along with it, and it was a bipartisan effort. It doesn't seem like a lot of people, and I'm talking about like the hard right. I'm not talking about like the traditional Republicans, but it seems like there is no room for compromise with some of the more extreme Republicans. And I don't know if your opponent, Tom Kean Jr., is one of them, but he's definitely falling in line and he's not standing up to the radicals of his party.
Tom Kane's record before going to Congress, he was moderate. You know,
Right. He
once
was.
he got to Congress, he really started leaning more towards the right. He's at this point fully aligned with MAGA. Welcomed Donald Trump's endorsement. Voted for the quote unquote big beautiful bill, gutted Medicaid, making one of the largest transfers of wealth we've seen in recent history, right, to the top 1%. Uh, he's maybe not as vocal as a Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I would say he's pretty much in the MAGA camp at this point. And that's sad, right? And I think that as our society evolves, you're right, we're seeing more polarization. We're seeing people that aren't willing to compromise. It's tough times we're in. And I think that for us to challenge some of the biggest issues that we're facing as a nation, we've got to be able to come together. But the problem is that that's not going to happen anytime soon. And that's for a variety of reasons. Number one, uh, number one, Citizens United, right? Citizens United is arguably worst thing that's happened to our country in the last 50 years, right? I mean, there's a direct relation on the attack on reproductive rights that's connected to Citizens United, right? Citizens United allows special interests to fund campaigns, right, through PACs, right? And so the very first thing that I think we need to take care of is the way that money works in politics, and we need some significant campaign finance reform. Um, and that's not enough, right? We also need to end gerrymandering, right? So we need independent redistricting boards to make sure that the districts represent the people, right? And not like these weird shaped. I mean, I think you'll have to check me on this, but I'm pretty sure that you can pretty much spell out the alphabet using shapes of different congressional districts, and I think that's a thing. You may want to check that out. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, how do you have the entire alphabet, right? Well, districts that are representing the alphabet. It's nuts. Um,
When you say
there's a few.
representing the alphabet,
So for example, you'll have a district that's like the letter A. Then you have another district that's shaped in the letter B. Like, it's
oh
just
yeah,
wild. It's it's
wow.
it's it's a joke. And again, just check me on that.
Like,
Sorry.
is the seventh district shaped like that? Because the seventh district is actually pretty fair, I think.
Seventh district. I mean, it's competitive, right? So if it's competitive, then it's probably somewhat fair. I mean, it's still a bit more. There's a 14,000 Republican voter advantage. So, you know, I I would say this district is competitive. I won't say it was shaped intelligently, because when you want to represent a district, right, it means that there's a commonality with the groups you're representing. But in this district, you have out in the western part of the district, you've got it's more farms, more rural areas, right? So you've got more farmers and whatnot. And then on the eastern part of the district, you're dealing with skyscrapers and cities and more urban areas. Personally, I think that this is a district that should really be two districts just based on the different demographics that you're representing. But in other ways, I'm actually enjoying it because I think that it forces you to get much stronger at messaging. And what I mean by that is that you've got to be clear as to your objectives and the things that you're fighting for, but how you get there and how you communicate that vision just varies based on who you're speaking to, right? Like, I'm not going to go into Rahway and start talking about how unfair it is that in Pennsylvania they can sell unpasteurized milk, and where the farmers 5 minutes away from that border, right, are struggling because they can't compete with people who are selling unpasteurized milk. Now, if that's right or wrong, that's a whole other story. But if we're talking about economics, right, like, that's a thing that won't make sense in the eastern part of the district, right? Um, so that's kind of what I mean. So I think it's a competitive district, but I do think that if gerrymandering were not a thing, I think this district would look very differently. It'd probably be broken up into, it would probably be split.
It is a very diverse district as far as geographics and also people. What you might not speak to a crowd in Westfield the way you would a crowd in the Clinton area or Springfield versus Sparta. Very because you got a few very blue counties or slivers of blue counties in your district like Essex and Union, and then you got Sussex and Warren, which are reliably Republican.
Mm-hmm. That is correct. Yeah, that's correct. And this counties like Warren and Sussex, because they're so Republican, they also haven't gotten a lot of attention from the Democratic Party, right? And I think that that's important. Like, you've got to be in there, and you've got to be able to have uncomfortable conversations and sit in uncomfortable positions with maybe a tougher audience, but most people are reasonable, right? Like, if you can sit there, it's kind of like I said earlier, right? They may disagree with you, but if at the very least they know where you stand, they'll respect you, right? And I think that someone who hides from their constituents and is not willing to um, face them and state their positions and defend their positions, I mean, what are we doing?
I completely agree with you. I was an intern for Josh Gottheimer's congressional campaign in 2018 in Newton, and Josh won Newton all but one time when he was running for reelection. Um, People are very surprised to learn that these a lot of these Republicans are some of the uh, most receptive. I mean, and I'm talking about people on the left because I'm not a leftist. I'm not a liberal. I'm a centrist or a little right of center. And I've said this for many campaigns I've worked on. Some of the nicest voters and some of the most receptive voters were people who were likely not going to vote for us, but they were not going to rule it out either. They weren't as gung ho as a lot of people might have assumed.
Yeah, no, I think that that's correct. I think that when you just give up on, one of the things that we've been doing the last few years is is we've been running a turnout campaign, right? Where I think as a party we would greatly benefit, especially in the long term, if we were focused on persuasion. Because to your point, there are people out there that we're just giving up on, where if we took the time to have that uncomfortable conversation or bring up that scary topic, um, you'd be shocked, right? You'd be shocked how many people you went over. I've seen that. I've seen a lot of brave representatives that are true public servants. Andy Kim is one of them. He's got a great story about it, right? He had someone who didn't vote for him, didn't like him. Um, Andy Kim had the courage to hold a town hall, as shocking as that might seem to some representatives. Um, and the guy waited in line to talk to him one on one, and he waited something like a half hour. I don't remember the exact story. And the guy said, "Hey, I just wanted to thank you. Like, I respect you, right? That's a public servant, you know?
Yep,
And I think we need more of that.
completely agree. And when you say no town halls, I have a feeling you're referring to a certain congressman in your district, right?
I mean, at this point, I could refer to so many Republicans. I think they're all copying the Tom Kean playbook and just
You were cutting in and out a little bit. What happened?
uh, no, I was saying that at this point, I think you can pretty much refer to more than just Tom Kean, right? Because there's a lot of Republicans that are no longer holding town halls. But that's a Tom Kean playbook, right? They're copying it.
Of course. So I want to ask real quickly, what I don't want you to throw like other previous Democratic opponents on the bus, but what are you going to do differently from some of the other people who have run against Tom Kean Jr. or even Leonard Lance for that matter?
Mhm. I actually think that as a party, you see this a little bit more often. So we do a really good job at, um, hold on one second.
Sure.
Sorry about that. Um, so sorry, one second. Okay, sorry about that. So I think that as a party, what you see a lot of, I'm not saying this is the rule, right? But what you do see it is we do a really good job at Trump bashing, right? And so we're great at tearing things down. And as I said earlier here, sadly that's part of the game. But as far as what you can do different, I mean, you really got to sell a vision. You got to sell what it is that you're going to be replacing this with. And I think there's two people that come to mind that do a great job with that, right? I think Jake Auchincloss and Ro Khanna have developed a very unique messaging, and I think that's what they're doing, right? They're reminding you of all of the things that the administration is doing wrong, and that in our case, Tom Kean, right? But the Republican representation is not doing great. But they're not stopping there. They then turn around and they pivot. And this is what we should do. And here's why, right? And they explain these things. And some of them I don't agree with, and some of them I do. But the fact is that they're able to convey a strong message, a clear message, right? And as crazy as some of these ideas, not crazy, but as uncommon as some of these ideas may be, they're offering a new vision to voters. And I think that's one of the reasons that they're so popular. And I think that as a party, we need to recognize that, and we need to do that in our own sake, right? And it's what's your vision of the world? How do you see doing things better? And it's not that other candidates across the country or even in this district, right, in the past, not that they haven't done that. It's just that the message hasn't penetrated. Like we've spent a lot more time feeding to fear and insecurity and pulling at some of the darker parts of our personalities and humanity. And again, it's sadly something we have to do, right? But I think we need to spend more time on we need to do that, but we also need to be able to spend time on, hey, like here's the vision, here's the light, here's what we're going to do better, right? Here's what we're going to fix, here's the things that we want to try out, right? Um, Going back to what I talked about, investments into R&D, like we know that's good, right? But to be able to verbalize why it's good and the proof as to why that's good, right? And pointing back to history, if I think if we spend more time articulating those points, right, we're going to be this is where we're going to appeal to the moderates and the independents. Um, Personally, I hate fear stoking, right? Like when I see ads that are scary and dark, like that doesn't appeal to me. And I think that there's a segment of voters that are checked out or just guarded because they just don't like that kind of messaging, right? And I think that being able to paint a better future and really focusing on that, right, through policy and ideas and whatnot, I think that that will appeal to people. And so, as far as what I'm going to be doing different, that right, we're going to definitely highlight all the things that were done that are not okay, but what are we also replacing it with, right? And that's what I'm envisioning as far as how we're going to be running this campaign.
Hmm. So, what issues do you think are going to help win Democrats back control of the House of Representatives in 2026 if Democrats do, in fact, do that?
I think it's a populist economic message, right? I think that it's focusing on affordability, right? Healthcare, education, housing. I think it's also, creating good paying jobs, right? So, green jobs, right? Infrastructure, et cetera. And lastly, it's protecting our democracy. As crazy as that is to say, I think that voters recognize the grift that's happening down in Washington, and we've got to stop that. And I think that most people, if they understood exactly what's happening, they'll see that our democracy is going through a tough time right now, right? When the president's net worth goes up something like, I don't know, 300 or 400% in his first not even half year in office, the grift is real, right? And I think that that's corroding our democracy. And I think that if we don't put measures in place to stop that stuff, I think it'll be we've been the beacon of democracy across the world, and I think that we're in for a rocky ride, is how I'll put it.
Have you ever met President Trump before or no?
Oh goodness, no.
How are you prepared to stand up to him or even work with him on behalf of your district? Because if
Well,
you get elected to Congress, he's going to be the president.
I mean, look, you got to give credit where credit is due. I mean, he just undertook an effort to lower, prescription drugs, I believe is what it was, and that's good. Like, now people don't talk about it as much because he's doing so many other terrible things, and to just focus just on that is not fair. Right? You can't congratulate him for one out of 1,000 things he did that was good, and 999 other things that are bad. But when he has good ideas, or when he undertakes measures that are going to help everyday Americans, yeah, I can get on board with that stuff. Now, our goal is to take back the House next cycle, right? And so I think that if we can take back the House, we will be able to do a lot more things. Let's hypothetically say we don't, right? Because this is kind of if we've taken back the House, like as far as what we can do to slow him down, to stop him, I mean, you know, those are all given, right? Um, but what if we are not in control of the House, right? That's where it gets a little bit more tricky, and I think that that's where we have to take a lead from people like Cory Booker. A lot of folks criticize him and say, "Oh yeah, 25-hour speech. Like, what did he really do? Like, there was no legislation. He didn't stop anything." And I think that's false. I think that energy is a very real thing, and I think that when he did that, he infused energy into Democrats and even independents, right? And I think that energy is contagious, right? And I think that when you're able to get in front of people, I think when you're able to vocalize a vision, when you're able to highlight things that are wrong, when you're able to energize, that has a compound effect, right? And I think that when you're not able to control legislation or even the day-to-day proceedings of the House of Representatives, then you better be a really good messenger. Like you better be really polished, really solid, and you really better be able to connect with people because the energy is what'll move things. And as a matter of fact, I think part of the reason we're going to take back the House next year is because of that, because there's been a big infusion of energy into the Democratic Party as of late. I mean, you're seeing rallies all over the place, right? Protests everywhere. You're seeing, I mean, all types of it's it's going into the presidential election last year. I thought we were energized. I thought we were bringing our A game. And after Donald Trump got elected, and some of these measures have been undertaken, like Cory Booker's 25-hour speech, I didn't realize we had another gear in us, and I'm starting to see that now. And so I think it's really recognizing that there's always another gear and being able to shift into it.
Well, morale is incredibly important, and I equate what Senator Booker did to sort of jump starting a car. And that's sort of what he did to some extent. I don't disagree with people that, it was that people who say that it was pointless and that nothing was accomplished. It's like, what is Cory Booker going to accomplish with the current administration? It's very, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very difficult. But if we're looking to see what message we can put out as a party and as a nation going forward, I think Cory Booker really put some pep into our step.
Yeah, he absolutely did. I mean, I think the jump starting the car is a great analogy. Right? You show up, you're energized, you put out your energy, it appeals to people, it energizes them, and then that compounds and and this is how change starts, right? This is what starts change, right? So yeah, I agree.
So we only have a few minutes left. We have a governor's race this June. Actually, we have a Democratic primary. I don't know if you've endorsed any candidates, but do you have a favorite as far as the Democratic Party, or are there any strengths of the candidates that you'd like to share with me?
Yeah, so I think that I kind of split them up in a few different ways. I think you've got Sweeney in South Jersey, and he's got a path, right? He's got the Southern Bloc behind him, and with so many candidates in this race, you can't discount it. Spiller's got the teachers, right? Then you've got Gottheimer in Bergen County, and he's going to probably turn out a lot of the Jewish community. Then you've got Ross and Steve Fulop, and they are probably competing a bit for the progressive vote. But there's even splits there. And then lastly, Mikey Sherrill, who is obviously the establishment candidate and the front runner. I think by what polls are saying, it looks like Mikey is leading the way. But I wouldn't be shocked if Steve Fulop pulls out the win, right? I think that there's been a lot of groundswell support for him, especially in the past few weeks. I can't drive more than like a few miles without seeing a Steve Fulop sign. And I think he's done a great job at articulating his vision. I think that he's very substance heavy on policy. He's got a ground game that really only Mikey is matching, right? And his campaign is all volunteer. So while Mikey may be the front runner, I wouldn't be shocked if Steve Fulop pulls out a W here in the next 9 days from now.
Interesting. Well, I just want to ask a couple more questions. Who are your political role models? They could be dead or alive.
Oh man. Dead or alive. I really appreciated Barack Obama's energy. I think that for me personally, as far as all of the presidents we've had, he was personally the most inspiring for me. And I think that he has I feel like he was almost born to be president. um, I would say that we have what feels to me like the most competent, effective, dynamic team in the Senate. We couldn't be luckier to have people like Cory Booker and Andy Kim, who are both lifelong public servants. And I mean, built to be senators. Like if you learn about their backgrounds, especially Andy Kim. I mean, Cory Booker's gonna at some point run for president, right? But I'm a bit more familiar with Andy Kim's background, right? And so if you look into his background, I mean, it's like he was almost like made in a lab to be like a senator, right? And I mean that in a good way, right? The schools he went to, right? Like the things he did, just his overall personality. Like he doesn't, when you're in Congress, you get like these special plates, right? To stand out. I don't know, get some, I don't know what benefits you get, right? He doesn't even put those on his car, and no one talks about that, right? So it's not even like he's doing it as a gimmick or to like say, "Oh, look how humble and normal I am." No, he just doesn't do it, and no one talks about it, right? Those are folks that I really, really admire.
Well, that's a good answer, and it actually reminds me of I visited Thomas Jefferson's Monticello in Charlottesville, Virginia. I think on his tombstone, I don't remember where it is, but he lists three accomplishments that he was most proud of. Presidency was not on them. It was I don't remember what all three were, but I know one of them was starting the University of Virginia. Can't remember the other two, but I think that Andy Kim, in that regard, has a little bit of Thomas Jefferson in him, where that he doesn't view public service as a personal accomplishment; he views it as just that, public service.
Hmm.
Because it's not about him; it's about us.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, the guy's selfless, right? He's selfless. I mean, he was, I think he was born to be a public servant. He was born to be a senator.
Well, before we go, do you have a website that my listeners and viewers can go to check you out in your campaign?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. VarelaForCongress.com. And you can follow me on social media. I think our handle in every place is Varela 4NJ. So Varela, the number four, and then the letters NJ.
All right.
And
Well,
that's Varela with one L, Varela.
all right. Well, Brian Varela, Democratic candidate for New Jersey's very competitive 7th congressional district. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan.